Hello. Hello, everyone. So today we are in December's meeting. We have tons of things to discuss. It's going to be a lot. We have a long agenda, but if we don't get to make all the go through all the items, we'll be throwing some of the items away, and we'll schedule them for the next meeting. That will be in January January. Awesome. So we've just had a voting on whether Miles Sabin, Typelevel representative, should join, and acceptance has been unanimous. So Miles will be joining in the next minutes, I guess. And we're gonna start the meeting right away so that we don't get more late because we are already 20 minutes late. So the first point in the discussion is literal based singleton types, and that was a proposal created by Adrian at some point, I think, or Adrian was just the reviewer, but it was created by other members, and it was picked up by Miles Sabin around 1 year ago or something like this, and he provided an implementation in Typelevel Scala. As he is not here and he will be a valuable contributor to this discussion, we're just going to skip this item for the moment, and we'll get back to it afterwards.
Which number is that?
This is SIP 23, sorry.
23, okay,
yes.
24.
And for now, we're just going to jump to the third item in the agenda, which is match infix types to meet expression rules. So that we've already gone through that proposal several times, and Oron has has amended all the changes we've asked him to do. So far, I would say that, well, there is now an implementation in Scala, so there is a PR, an open PR with it, and the PR was passing. The community build seems not to be passing. I think kind projector was failing, following what Oron told me, but it's something that he will look into, and he will fix in the next days. So I would say that as we have right now a proposal, a solid proposal, and an implementation, I think it's about time, we vote on the acceptance for the acceptance of this proposal. So the only thing that will be missing after the vote is a review, and that will happen. That will happen the next days, I guess, when Adrian gets some time, or some member in the Scala team alive and gets some time, there's some free time. So having said that, committee members, how do you feel about this proposal, and what's your opinion about it? To me, it reads very solid.
It's the one that changes the
precedence. The precedence rules. Yeah, exactly. For
infix.
Yes, types. It's not the prefix types.
No,
and that was.
Yeah.
That was.
Yeah, that one was already pretty solid last time.
Exactly.
I agree.
Okay.
So, I don't have anything more to say than what we discussed the previous times. I think it's ready.
I agree, it's a good idea. Hey, Miles.
Hi, folks.
Welcome.
Welcome.
So I'm certainly generally in favor of this proposal. I'm curious what the implementation status is in Dotty. Are there still any important differences between the implementation in Scala 2 and the one in Dotty?
I don't know. Are there still any? The one
Miles,
thing,
I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you.
The one thing which could be a problem is the infix star, because that clashes with var args. So I'm just looking at the discussion of the Dotty issue. That was 1961 Dotty issue. I'm not sure what the current status is. So at the point there was a problem with that it would require look ahead, but maybe that's unavoidable. Yeah.
For infix star? Why? Well, how does that SIP change anything with respect to the star? It seems that this issue is just
it's
for any infix star. That's not
it's
really.
Probably a different.
It doesn't.
Right. Yeah,
doesn't relate to the precedence.
Yeah. So that could be, but it's a dirty shortcut.
I think it's it seems like.
Yeah, but you're right. It doesn't have to do with the wording of the SIP. Okay.
So Miles, you just joined. We were discussing right now about the third item in the agenda. That's matching infix types, or matching the precedence rules of infix types to meet the expression rules. So it seems so far that we are kind of like, we have a consensus here. Julian and the rest of the committee members over there haven't said anything yet. But do you have an opinion on this?
I think if there's no obvious technical obstacles, I think aligning the type language with the term language, that can only be a good thing. I'm in favor of that. Sounds good to me.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So let's just vote formally about this and proceed. Who is in favor of this, on the acceptance of this proposal?
I'm in favor as well.
Okay. Adrian?
Yep.
Awesome. So unanimous. Okay. So, thanks, Oron, for your hard work on this.
Congratulations.
So, we move to the second item that we skipped before, literal-based singleton types. So, Miles, you did some amendments and some changes to the proposal some days ago. Can you please explain us a little bit about that and what's the status right now?
Do you mean do you want me to basically explain this or explain the changes I made?
Okay, let's start by introducing the proposal, and then you can explain between your changes and what it is.
Okay, so the I hadn't actually basically the SIP has been in a fairly kind of untouched form, I think, since its first draft. I hadn't actually realised that quite how much work was going to need to be done on it, which is not to say that there was wasn't a lot of useful work done in the first place, but it certainly needed quite a bit of work to turn it into a finished, polished document. So a lot of it was that. The rest of it was basically updating it and bringing it into line with the implementation the implementation which has been a pull request against lightband Scala for some considerable period of time now, and also which is more or less the same thing, the implementation which has been present in Typelevel Scala in the last few releases of Typelevel Scala, most of which sort of the delta, I guess, has been a result of basically a mixture of filling out the functionality as originally described completely. I think the initial cut, again, lots and lots of work done initially by Jorge, Leontief, and Adrian. But there were quite a few bits and pieces which have been kind of left either open-ended or with various kind of to-do markers on them. There's been a fair amount of feedback from use of the implementation in Typelevel Scala, and I think a few other people have actually just built the pull request against lightband Scala, and I guess some input from various things that have proved to be useful in the shapeless equivalents of various bits of this SIP. So various things like the witness type class, for example, in shapeless have made their way over. So in terms of I mean, the general outline, I guess, is hopefully fairly clear to most people. I mean, the idea is to allow literals to value type and string and also symbol type kind of literals to operate as types, designating the corresponding singleton type. There's a bunch of other sort of fairly, I mean, fiddly things which are enumerated in the SIP which go along with this, which mainly relate to type inference. So, for example, the Scala compiler up until this SIP has been reasonably careful to not expose singleton types, because actually in most circumstances, singleton types aren't actually what people want. People do not typically want, if they define a vowel to be the value 1, they typically want the type of that vowel to be int rather than the singleton type int. So what part of the sort of the delicacy of the implication has actually been sort of juggling type inference to make sure it does the right thing. I'm fairly confident that the SIP has in its the pull request and the documentation of it. I'm reasonably confident the documentation matches the pull request. The pull request, I'm reasonably confident, actually meets people's expectations now. There's been quite a few people using it for quite a while. There's a couple of libraries that are built using it. It seems to do the right things. It seems to do what people expect for the most part. Which isn't to say there aren't decisions which could have gone differently. And I guess that's kind of the guts of what I mean, beyond basic, is this generally a good idea or not? Is the guts of what we would actually need to discuss are things along those lines. Does that help start things off? I'm not hearing you, Jorge.
Yeah. Yep. So Adrian is the reviewer of this proposal. Adrian, have you had a look? Have you had some time to look into this?
Yeah, briefly. So mostly Lucas has been working with Miles on the pull request from the Lightbend team. I think the key thing here is as Miles was saying, is the type inference one, and I think I'd like to clarify that internally we infer the singleton types and then we widen, and now there's a way to opt out of widening by adding the singleton bound to a type parameter. That was kind of always in the language, but wasn't really implemented. Or I shouldn't say the language, it was kind of floating around, but it wasn't really documented or implemented. So this pull request now implements that undocumented behavior and lets people use that to infer singleton types. In all other occasions, type inference should work the same way as before, is my understanding.
Yeah, that's correct.
What are the similarities between your implementation, Miles, and the implementation that Dotty has? Do you know something about that?
I haven't done a direct comparison. I believe that they're pretty much completely aligned now. I think the main person who's been basically opening tickets on the Typelevel Scala issue tracker saying, hey, it works like this in Dotty and not like this in the Typelevel Scala version, I think it's mainly been Oron Port has done quite a lot of that. All I can say is that he stopped complaining about divergences between Dotty and Scala now. So I think that probably means that we're pretty much aligned. I noticed that a few changes were made in the Dotty implementation. I think implementing the use of the singleton bound on a type variable to allow a singleton type to be inferred. So I believe that's recently landed in Dotty. And I think the value of type class, has that also appeared in Dotty? Yeah. And also singleton types for symbols, I think, have also just recently appeared as well. So my understanding is that basically pretty much everything is aligned now.
Yeah, I have one question where I'm unsure about the thing. So that's the point with narrow. So presence of an upper bound of singleton on a formal parameter indicates that singleton types should be inferred for the type parameters at call sites. So I'm not sure how I should understand that. If I write val x equals narrow 22, what's the inferred type of x? Is it 3 or is that end?
Can you tell me where are you looking at in the SIP?
If I look at the proposal summary, 1 to 3rd point, where it's explained.
Oh, right. Gotcha.
Right. So.
The inferred type here should be the singleton type 23. I mean, typically, if you were immediately assigning that to a val, that would be widened at the assignment.
Yeah.
But for example, if that was an argument to some other method. For example, well, if that was used in a context which would typically not widen, then you would see
that's what I want to see. Yeah, good. Yeah, because otherwise there would be an inconsistency that if I just write val x equals 23, then x is int, and narrow should basically behave just like the identity, I guess.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly as it
Okay,
should be.
cool. Excellent. Then thanks for explaining. Yeah, otherwise I think it's. I also think we're pretty much in agreement now.
So I have one question on as instance of. It's a pet peeve of mine. So here it says that as instance of would throw if you try to catch if you try to cast 1 into 2 the type, which I guess makes sense, but is that aligned with trying to cast to a singleton type of an ARF? It isn't, right? I mean, if I cast A into B dot type, the cast is widened.
Sorry, if you cast A into B dot type, that should give you a class cast exception. I think it does.
Yeah, there's actually an example where the compiler would blow up where we cast global 1 to global dot type. And under this change, it would actually enforce the equality of those things so that the cast is sound, and it would actually fail on the compiler at runtime.
So actually, I do remember the bootstrapping problem. I can't remember what I did about that. Certainly, my gut feeling is that it's my morally it should fail. It is entirely possible that in the implementation I relax that somehow to allow the compiler to bootstrap.
You're right. Morally, it should fail, but it seems it doesn't.
So I'm pretty sure. I know we've discussed this. There may very well be a test for this somewhere in either as a neg test, perhaps.
Yeah, let's take this as a to-do item on the
process sure,
to move the meeting along.
I think that's fine.
Okay. Any more questions?
So sorry, I wasn't fully clear on Martin's point about the consistency between the val and the singleton bound on the type parameter. Could we just quickly revisit that? I just didn't catch all of it.
Sorry, I just. That just meant that so we agree that if in the case, do you have the example with narrow and wide? That was.
Yeah, I have it now.
Okay. Yeah. So the question was, if I write val x equals narrow 23 without anything else, then the type of x, the inferred type of x would be int. On the other hand, I could write val x colon 23 equals narrow 23, and that would work. So I think that's
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Agreed. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. The as instance of.
Is everybody comfortable with the idea of something which, I mean, in terms of the translation, I mean, obviously the is instance of, as instance of tests are translated to equality tests. Yeah. Is everyone comfortable with those throwing class cast exceptions if they fail? I mean, obviously it's somewhat arbitrary.
Actually, there's a thing which I think we're misinterpreting as instance of, and it's very easy to do so. I just fell into that trap myself. I think the philosophy with as instance of is really do the minimum necessary to make this pass bytecode. It's no correctness inferred, nothing. So as instance of basically never does an equality test, not for prefixes of types. So for instance, if you have a path dependent type x.c, then with is instance of you have to check that your prefix is the same as x. As instance of completely ignores these things. So as instance of is really sort of a backstop to say, make this pass the JVM. I have no idea what this will do otherwise. So I agree for is instance of, which should definitely check the equality, and in Dotty it does. But as instance of, really, the meaning of as instance of is erase the right-hand side and do a JVM cast on that one. Pattern matching, on the other hand, so if you do a pattern match, any case something with any case x colon 1, then that's an is instance of course. That would not.
Personally, I would prefer to see that produce a runtime error, but to be honest, it doesn't seem. It's certainly not something I would want to push back particularly hard on. So I'm quite happy to change the behavior if that's what the consensus is.
I think Martin.
I'm open to that as well, but I think the spec says that as instance of is defined in terms of pattern matching, so we should change that then, I think.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter in Scala C nor dotty. So as instance of really does
even less so in Scala D.
I mean, if someone, given that the actual PR as it stands does implement the check and throw the exception.
No, it's an efficiency thing, because if you do that, then morally you're obliged to check paths as well. So if you have a
literal, I mean, we're not going to have any,
and you can't do one without the other, and sort of then the balance is very much in favor to say no, we have a safe variant, and that's pattern matching, and as instance of just that really does the minimal to get into bytecode.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Fair enough.
That's certainly always how I've understood as instance of, and how I've taught it and seen it taught by others.
I guess in a way it's also what even Scala backend does, even with JavaScript types as well. So also makes sense over there. It's not bytecode, it's DIR, but same story.
So we need to decide what to do with this. So it has been around for more than 3 years. And right now we have an implementation. We seem to agree on the details of the proposal we have currently. So I think that maybe because it hasn't been picked up for a long time, it would make sense to let us sleep on it for one more review iteration. But if there is consensus, we could directly just vote in favor or against this proposal.
Have you opened it up for a public review? Because we typically do that.
Well, we typically let people comment on this proposal, but given the,
I mean, it's been available for people to use in more or less complete form for
that's true.
over a year. But yeah, there are at least 2 libraries that are built using it.
Mm-hmm. I think that counts for public review.
It has had more public review than most SIPs already.
I would say so. I would definitely suggest we vote today.
The as instance of change, if you feel confident that we want to do the change, then we can vote now. But I mean, we could say because there's this change, we want to wait, have a public period. So I'm open to either one.
I just opened a ticket on our bug tracker to align the spec for as instance of, and I think we can take that action item separate, because that's been a long-standing thing in Scala 2 anyway, that the spec was too strict on what as instance of means.
Yeah,
I agree. So it would make sense then to vote on directly on this.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So who's in favor of this proposal? Or if there are more comments, just please feel free to speak up. So we have Seth in favor. Miles in favor, right?
Yep.
Seth in favor.
Eugene
is in favor. Julian?
I'm okay with that as well.
Okay, and Adrian?
Let me just change my profile picture with me holding my hand up real quick.
One more.
Faster.
Oh, sorry, I was kidding. I guess I didn't have faith that Google would be that updating my profile pic.
It would be so cool.
It was my bad. Okay, so
it's definitely time I come back to Lausanne so you guys can get used to my sense of humor again.
Yeah, exactly. So okay, so then the proposal is approved unanimously. So thanks, Miles, for your work on this.
Ooh,
what an amazing SIP.
A long time coming.
Thanks very much, Miles.
Big one, this one. Probably the biggest tip we've had so far.
Yeah. Cool. This is good news. So let's move on now to the fourth item in the agenda. That's this. We asked Oron to split up from the previous SIP we just approved. It's a match. It's basically adding prefix types to a Scala. Prefix types haven't been around in a Scala since the beginning. So he argues that we should have some kind of common behavior between terms and types because we have prefix expressions. So I've seen a lot of activity in this area in the past weeks. First, Martin opened a PR to add prefix types in Dotty. It was not exactly as Oron proposed.
It's completely different than what is proposed.
But it is to some extent adding prefix types to Dotty. The PR now is closed, so I don't know what your take on that is, Martin. But in any case, Oron has done lots of changes into the proposal, and he has added also 3 motivations. Motivations are for refined, a library that relies on singleton types and adds numeric computations to numeric operations to types. Refined allows you to actually just add some kind of refinement types to Scala. And then also another library he's working on that he wanted to use prefix types just to express the duality between 2 types, just the fact that one type will be positive and the other type will be negative. And then he will provide some kind of evidences with implicits so that you could go from one to the other one, and vice versa. So it seems that there is some kind of examples and use cases for this. And lately, Martin has created a new proposal for macros and that unifies macros and staging. And then there he proposes prefix types to represent the duality between splices and quotes. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that use case, Martin.
Well, it's a nice syntax to just take splice and some term for splicing the term, right? And we can do that already for expressions because splice is a prefix operator, but we can't do it for type splicing. So if you wanted to splice a type in a type, then we can't use the same symbol because that would, according to the definition that we need, so essentially the prefix operators say if you have some prefix operator like tilde expression, then it's the same as expression dot unary underscore the operator, right? And what I'm after is to just say, well, that holds whether the tilde thing itself is a value or a type. It just holds. So in that sense, it's a very easy extension to say that, well, it's just, we said previously it only holds for values, now it also holds for types. Finished. End of story. It does clash with prefix, with infix types, which have a completely different
disagree relatively strongly with that interpretation. I mean, in my opinion, the SIP proposal as it's written makes much more sense because things are consistent between types. And there are analogous with terms, but Martin's proposal makes the unary types with the unary prefix types align with unary prefix terms, but they make them completely different than infix types, and that doesn't make any sense to me. I understand the use case, but I mean, if we're going to justify that change with the use case, I don't think that's valid. Then we should declare that it's something else. It's some syntax that is specifically for macros, and it does that splice, and it's special syntax. But generalizing it the way it's done to using a term
that's debatable.
Very well said, Sebastian.
It really doesn't. It's really not consistent with the infix types. To me, it doesn't make any sense. So I would be okay with special casing tildes for macros and splices more than I would be to generalize this.
So we'd have to look at other uses. Yeah.
Well, I think special casing it in that way would completely kill the prefix type.
Yes,
that's right.
Which I think would be unfortunate.
To me now I'm describing the two of lesser evils. My preference goes for the SIP, which is written currently. That one makes sense to me as a general construction.
Yep. So I'm actually very dubious about the SIP because basically the SIP does this one thing which we normally never do in Scala, which says, well, there are these 4 operators, and those you can use as prefix operators, and none of the others. Why did we do that? Well, because there happened to be syntax in Java. So that was the only reason to make this work somehow. Okay. So now if we elevate this to a principle in types, then why would we elevate these 4 operators to do something special on types?
So why does that argument is not applied to your alternative?
Because since we have it, so if we adopt splices as the fundamental way to do meta programming in Scala, then there's actually a use case. This thing is syntax, and there is a way to do that. And then probably taking it as a prefix operator, given that it is already a prefix operator for expressions, is the most elegant way to extend the syntax to that. But so for the moment, I would just hold back until until we know more about the other things. I think it's premature to actually decide one thing or the other right now.
I kind of look at the use cases that Oron proposes in singleton apps and Defiant, the library I was telling you about before. And I think they make sense to me. The fact that he wants to encode the same you can do with expressions in types, with terms in types. And I know, I think it's a good thing if we try to unify the language across types and terms and make it more consistent. And I think he only proposes to do that for the current unified unary prefix operators that we have for terms.
I fear it will just cause a lot of cuteness, and operator misuse. So I'm very skeptical.
Well, I think I don't think that rejecting the SIP will prevent the operator misuse or cuteness. It'll just make it even more confusing because it'll just be inconsistent between the type and the term level. People are already using this stuff, so it's really a case of, do you want consistency or do you want a confusion of stuff because of misalignment between the type and the term language.
I would just say, it's sort of one of these things which I would prefer not to have to deal with. Ideally, there would be no prefix anything, and then now that they are prefix operators, the question is, yes, you can make it, essentially, you can dig yourself a deeper hole by defining things for types and sort of making a feature out of sort of a concession, or you can just say, okay, this is it, and we won't go further with that. And I think both points are valid. And
yeah. And I think we shouldn't underestimate actually the potential for confusion with variance annotations. Like, I think
that's the other point.
Conceptually, it's clear that there's a difference, but I think it's easy to muddle the two when you're thinking about it. Hey, and since we need to think a bit more about this, I would propose we postpone this discussion and move on to the last topic because we have 8 minutes left in the meeting.
Yes. Yep. So that would mean that we would have another review iteration next time. And maybe
so I don't know what the best thing is. Maybe, it would be nice to give some feedback in a sense of like, what would sway us. I mean, I think Martin has expressed some valid concerns and explained the rationale behind the concerns.
Sure. I think that the point about variance annotations is the one that I think is the most serious. I would be very happy if Oron actually wants to get an implementation together relative to type level Scala, I'd be very happy to merge that and let people play around with it and see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I proposed before was just to delay the discussion until the next month, and then we can get also some feedback from Oron, and we can address our issues. So maybe the best way to move forward is that. What do you think, guys?
Is there a realistic prospect of this getting enough votes to pass?
Well, the guys don't speak up. I think that honestly it makes completely sense to me. But yeah, of course, there are some bad things like the variance annotation and the fact that people will need to think about that or when they read that kind of code.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for the record, I agree with Martin that this is a hole that shouldn't be dug deeper.
If it weren't for the variance annotation playing, I would be in favor of this proposal. But yeah, it's going to be too confusing.
Okay, so then it seems that we have a more clear now.
So I mean, I would have to to sway me over the yes part. It would need some. It would probably need a lot of convincing.
What is your take on this, Julian and Jim?
I think that the potential for unification of language features is definitely exists. On the other hand, I think it was Olaf who commented on confusion with variance.
Yeah,
that's unfortunate. So I think if there's no very strong use case for that, and there are unknowns, some downsides, maybe we shouldn't do that.
Yeah,
it's not like we have to implement all language features that come to mind.
Right, and I think to elaborate on the use case, I think people are going to expect that this actually works when you do like -1 or something like that. And then 2 - 1 is actually the same type or something like that. So you quickly get into having to do constant folding and defining type equality to include all kinds of math and
that is exactly what singleton does. I mean, that's the purpose of the library.
I know, but yeah, I mean that's a whole other, maybe almost a whole other language. You could do trivial cases like that, but how about string concatenation or, take it
again? I think if you take a look at singleton and refined, I mean that they have pretty broad coverage.
Right, but exactly, and that's my point, is that it gets very complicated very quickly, and you can basically get into SMT solving and refinement types and all that stuff, and that's just very interesting things to research, but I think too soon to really commit to.
This is stuff that's, I mean, so refined, for example, which unsurprisingly has quite a lot to do with refinement types, is widely used. It's depended on by a number of widely used.
Well, I think widely used.
Both have modules which have dependencies on refined, precisely because it's incredibly useful.
Yeah, but I would.
But this stuff is already used in production.
Yeah, well, people use Node.js in production.
Okay, but Cersei is not a trivial library. It's one of the most important, JSON libraries in.
Oh, you accidentally muted yourself. Yeah, anyway, and I think this is a really big discussion that we can't probably fruitfully conclude in 3 minutes.
I would be very, very open to the idea of deferring this until we've had some actual experience with an implementation. I mean, like I said, I would be very happy to have this merged in type level Scala. Let people actually play around with it and see how it works out in practice.
Mm-hmm.
There is an implementation.
Yeah, I mean, as long as it's clear that we're not like even close to saying this is
absolutely
to go into official Scala.
Yeah, agreed.
Mm-hmm. So, what is your feedback, Julian?
I don't think I can add anything meaningful to the conversation.
Yeah. So to me, it seems that it would be best not to waste Oron's time, because it seems that almost all of us kind of see difficult to pass this proposal as it is right now, and it doesn't seem that there is much room for changing your opinions, at least from my point of view, as I see you arguing about this. I have no problem to defer this to the next meeting. That's up to you. But it would be worth as well that you kind of speak up now and you say.
So one other issue I have with it is I just looked at the thing again, and so there's, for instance, he uses a type, a bang, and then it's bang cont2 in brackets, and I find that actually eminently readable. This is great. So you can use types like that. So the only issue with prefix type is we can write it without the brackets, which is cute, but confusing, because then I have to define the type no longer as bang, but unary bang, so it's another twist. And it doesn't really give us, I mean, I would say it actually probably decreases clarity in most cases. The case for infix types is much stronger, because you say, well, infix types, often they are infix operators. If you have to put them as a prefix and then add the arguments, then if you want to have, let's say, associative long chains of them, it gets really harder to read. But this thing is not harder to read. Writing the brackets doesn't make it harder to read. So from a usability perspective, also, I'm very, very skeptical about that.
So Miles wants to defer this discussion.
I think I probably want to defer it longer than just the next meeting, assuming the meetings are monthly. I'd suggest deferring it until there's been some significant experience with an implementation. I don't think we can really get a feel for this from just reading a document. I think people need to use it.
Let's talk about it in spring or something.
And how is this
Northern Hemisphere spring?
How is this going to address these issues that the committee shows now?
If the issue
practical, then it's practical.
No, I think the issues that we're talking about aren't really technical so much as ergonomic. They're to do with how people actually interact with the language feature when they're actually working with code. I mean, for that you really, I think, need to have a concrete feel of the language under your fingers, as it were. And it may very well turn out that people's experience in practice will have some effect on the shape of the SIP. I mean, either because people decide that some changes need to be made, or because they decide that the problems which people are raising now actually don't turn out to be such a big deal in practice.
Okay. So this is the first time these ideas are in an independent SIP. So this means that this SIP is not numbered. So it's up to you right now to number SIP, and we'll see what the outcome of that is. If it gets numbered, then we can just continue discussing this proposal in the next meetings. If it's not, then we need to skip it. So maybe it's about time to vote on this.
Yeah, that I mean, if we remember what is supposed to be the criterion to decide whether or not we're going to number a SIP, it's whether or not it has even the slightest change to get into it. According to our discussion, I think it deserves a number. It has. I mean, it's not like we were all immediately saying, no, this is never going to make it. Right? So according to that criterion, I think it should receive a number.
Sebastian is for, then Miles is for, I guess.
Yeah, I am.
So,
You need a quorum to number it, or I think there's just sufficient interest.
just a normal vote. Yeah. Who else is in favor? Yes, Seth raised his hand. Edwin?
Yeah,
let's
sure.
number it.
Let's number it.
And Julian?
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. So Martin, you are there. Okay, awesome. So we number the SIP and we continue the discussion in the next meeting. So it seems that we don't have much time left, so we're just gonna conclude the meeting. In the next meeting, we will discuss about what Adrian has been proposing in the Scala Dev, GitHub repository and the issue tracker. he has some cool ideas that we discuss in the next day.
Do we have a link to that?
Yes, that's in the agenda. So the ideas are basically, Adrian can probably elaborate on them, but they are basically things like moving package objects and only allowing simple black box macros and changing the implicit scopes and how implicit search works to simplify it.
I should have
trying to stir the pot a little bit.
I should have a by name implicit SIP together by the next meeting.
Oh, great.
This one will actually have a proof in it.
Unfortunately. Nice.
Okay, cool.
Guys, how do you manage to talk at the same time all the time?
There's just, the latency is just right.
Did you say something, Adrian? I didn't hear you.
Oh, I was sorry. I was saying I have to drop off soon. So about the simplification things, I was mostly just trying to, capture a few ideas and stir up some discussion, and maybe open up the floor for more proposals for simplification in 2.14. I think a lot of them are basically also just about aligning with what is going on in Dotty, and I hope there's consensus for a few of those, but very open to discussion. Before I just hang up and run away, just wanted to quickly suggest something about the opaque types SIP.
Yes.
I've just been thinking. I looked at the implementation a little bit, and I've been thinking about how you could implement this. And I think the key challenge is that we don't have the context can't contribute type constraints. So the way that you were implementing it by adding implicit witnesses to the type equality, I think needs to be specified, because it isn't exactly the same as actually having type equality hold in the companion object.
I had the same comments in my review.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is now a type about this, by the way, and I'm implementing it with a standing for transformer and like a very simple type traverser that removes type trees.
Okay. Yeah, we should talk about it, because I still think I don't see how subtyping and so on could take the context into account to really properly integrate this into the type checker. But I guess that's for another time.
Yes. I
just wanted to just drop this on the table and run.
Okay.
That makes sense. Let's discuss it in the next meeting then.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Sorry, I have to go.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Ciao.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Okay, cool.
Thanks. Have a good one.
You too. Ciao.
Cool.